Um, Good morning to all, and especially to those that are joining us online. We're very glad that you can be with us this morning. I have the pleasure of inviting our second keynote speaker for today, Dr. Roger Chow. He is the Assistant Director and Head of Education, Youth and Sports at the ASEAN Secretariat. And as Wes mentioned, thinking with all of our reflections from the past day, I think we can listen to this keynote and then push further on what we can do together. So I think for this session, perhaps the best format, if I can invite Roger up to the stage.
Okay, thank you everyone. Now I'm scared because everybody said almost everything that needs to be said yesterday and this morning. So I was tempted to just say thank you and I'm done. But anyway, I have 20 minutes. So what I want to talk about is looking at the potential of micro-credentials towards community building. ASEAN community in this particular case. And if we look at a broader perspective, global community building. Have to see the yes. So I titled my talk actually micro-credentials for lifelong learning, but also reshaping education towards a resilient ASEAN community. Looking back also in the UN's Transforming Education Summit and follow-up actions and commitments of the various UN member states, including ASEAN member states. I always like to start off when I talk about ASEAN community building back to the ASEAN Community Vision 2025, which I would like to highlight that it has been reiterated that ASEAN community is part of the global community, and as part of the global community is committed towards the achievement of UN 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Furthermore, in one of the three pillars, the sociocultural community, the core focus is people, not just students, everyone from the younger population all the way to the elderly population, to make them unleash and achieve the full potential towards delivering and contributing to society and the community. Although we always talk about education, ensuring inclusive, equitable, quality education and promoting lifelong learning for all is one of the key elements of the Sustainable Development Goals and cross-cutting, without which we cannot achieve the other sustainable development goals, but there are other sustainable development goals. So let us frame what's happening in the ASEAN region, particularly in the policy perspective. Some of this were presented yesterday, but the Master Plan on ASEAN Community Connectivity 2025, adopted in 2016, aims for a seamless, comprehensively connected and integrated ASEAN. So we're talking about harmonization, connectivity, not just in terms of infrastructure, but also in relation to people connectivity. In 2020, there were a discussion on a declaration on human resource development for a changing world of work, highlighting the recognition that the workplace is changing rapidly. Aside from just changing rapidly, it has implications towards skills and competencies required to effectively contribute and engage in the world of work. Quite recently, the Declaration on Digital Transformation of Education Systems in ASEAN, adopted in 2022, and the roadmap, which was adopted in August 18 this year at the ministerial level, highlights the importance of looking at digital transformation for the entire education system, including the TVET sector and higher education. This includes ensuring safe digital environments, cybersecurity, enhancing and narrowing the digital gaps, digital literacy. So the focus on teachers and the importance of micro-credentials for capacity building should not be underestimated. In fact, yesterday, a lot of people were talking about, if we're talking about the use and how to actually develop micro-credentials, our teachers and lecturers are not there yet. But how do you enhance their capacity? Ethel was talking about going online, learning from MOOCs to develop capacity for online teaching and learning. And this is an example of how micro-credentials can be used for capacity building. It's cheaper, although the initial cost of developing it is more expensive, probably. But in the long run, and the reach and participation towards each individual micro-credential or digital OERs is substantial. And the return of investments and cost-benefit analysis will probably be on the positive side. A comprehensive recovery framework, this was more or less focused on the COVID pandemic issue, but it talks about accelerating inclusive digital transformation. Keyword is inclusive. Digital master plan, looking at the region to become more leading digital community and economic bloc powered by transformative digital technologies, services, and ecosystem. What do you see in common? It talks about transformation and the use of digital technologies. Digital technologies is not new. It's been there for at least 20 years and more recently over the past decade. But the recognition and the actual use in practice has been accelerated even before the pandemic, but more recently because of the pandemic. So we were catalyzed to fast track digital transformation and the use of digital technologies. Now, briefly speaking, in the work plan on education, I just wanted to highlight two things. Develop ASEAN awareness is basically focus on the use of education towards community building, enhancing a sense of belonging. But it's also about building resilient and environmentally responsible education practices through, and including mental health and well-being of teachers. When we always talk about digital technologies being in the online environment, having a toll on our learners and the younger generation in terms of mental health and well-being. We tend to forget that the teachers and lecturers are also under stress. Now, in higher education, we talk about enhancing regional capacity in higher education, particularly as a part of a lifelong learning provision, including harmonization of higher education. And this is what I wanted to talk about. In the TVET sector, we also talk about regional cooperation exchanges in terms of governance systems, quality assurance, and enhancing, building capacity and innovations and mobility towards changing labor market demands. These two aspects, changing labor market, addressing the demands of the labor market, using innovation, and basically enhancing lifelong learning provision are the keywords. Yesterday, we've talked about how micro-credentials can contribute to enhancing training in the workforce and industry. We talk about how micro-credentials can contribute to capacity building in the education sector, in higher education, the lecturers, even management and administrators. So the potential is there. Another thing that happened was in July 2022, the roadmap on ASEAN Higher Education Space 2025 and its implementation plan was launched. Philip was there, a lot of our friends were there. Key thing there is it's to build, main objective is to fully implement initiatives towards an ASEAN higher education space and the management of an ASEAN branded scholarship by 2025. Take note, 2025, but that's not exactly 2025. It's just a starting point because the working group has a TOR only until 2025. Key areas, if you look at the key areas, we talk about promoting awareness and supporting the development of an ASEAN higher education space, regional quality assurance, the implementation of the ASEAN qualifications reference framework, regional cooperation in higher education mobility, qualifications, and of course, sustainability. Furthermore, and it's a work in progress. We are hoping that by next year, early next year, we will have the SEAMEO or SEAMEO ASEAN, it doesn't really matter what, joint declaration on a common higher education space in Southeast Asia, which we hope to be adopted. And the key aspect there is that both SEAMEO and ASEAN will say that there is only one higher education space in Southeast Asia, and we will collaborate and coordinate in supporting it and making it happen. Take note, it's a big dream, a lot of work to be done, and we need all the help from everyone. But we will be working together on this. Now let's talk about why micro-credentials and why lifelong learning. Anyone familiar with this? Okay. I presented this in the UNESCO-KEDI workshop about 6-7 years ago in Holiday Inn, Bangkok. And this was developed based on a report in the 1970s by UNESCO, essentially highlighting that the 4 pillars of learning are based on learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together. And in spite of the fact that the environment and society has changed significantly, the 4 pillars of learning continue to be true as of today. We don't know in the future, but I think it will continue to do so. So we talk about skills and competencies, but we also need to talk about being personal and being part of the community. Learning to a certain extent, yes, you have to learn so you earn money or you go into business, entrepreneurship. But it's also about personal preferences. What do you want to be? Who do you want to be? And how do you want to engage with the community? We talk about recognition and mobility. One of the things in lifelong learning is that we do learn a lot of things, even outside of formal and informal settings. And yesterday, I was so happy that there were discussions on recognition of prior learning, because personally, I do believe that what we have achieved in terms of skills and competencies should be recognized. And we shouldn't go back to a formal and informal setting to learn again what we already know. So the APEL programs from Malaysia and a few discussions on the use of lifelong learning and assessments to bridge them going for further education or for entry to the world of work is very important. And of course, we have to consider that learning occurs in local, national, regional, and global contexts, and its recognition and application is similar. But at the end of the day, it's all about the learners. How do they want to learn? And the role of micro-credential is not about teaching the learners how they can learn, but it's about providing the opportunities for learning, facilitating and providing resources for learning. We have to consider that we've been talking about inclusion and equitable quality education. Major challenges for the past, 30 years, 40 years, maybe even 50 years or more. The potential of ICT is significant, but take note, it also has the opposite side of the coin, which also focus on the increasing gap in terms of digital divide, digital literacy issues, the added burden of having to learn how to use digital technologies, new technologies. The new technologies are always advancing, and people have to continuously learn how to utilize the new technology. Utilize in relation to how they want to use technology, not just to learn how the technologies actually operate. It has to be used. We've talked about ChatGPT, we've talked about generative AI, and the challenge, and people were always talking about, oh, are we going to be replaced by generative AI? Are we going to be replaced by robots? These discussions and questions has been thrown out to everyone for 10, 15 years, 20 years ago, and we're still here. There will be changes, as like if you're talking about industry, there are sunset and sunrise industry. If we're talking about disciplines and programs, there are disciplines which will be in demand, and the demand goes up and down as well. The problem there is, do we have the supply to meet the demand. I'm talking about economics. Take note, the supply and the demand interaction and the dynamics changes a lot. However, the supply of educational programs, including true micro-credentials, takes time to build. Similarly, when you're talking about industry, you talk about a new product that you think you want to push to the market, you still need to build the factory, ensure you have the supply chain, and to ensure you get the raw materials to develop, and then the marketing ecosystem. So when you look at education, developing the micro-credentials alone will take time. Content, enhancing the capacity of teachers to ensure that effective pedagogy is inculcated in the way they deliver micro-credentials or the way they facilitate learning. Take note that it's no longer about educating, but learning. It's not about teaching, but facilitating learning. Totally changed. We've talked about outcomes-based education for 20 years or maybe more. And when I was in Bangladesh, and in fact, my friend asked me to ask a group of friends to present about what OBE is, because it was mandated in Bangladesh that they all have to use OBE already, but they were not taught what OBE is and quality assurance. However, OBE and delivering programs using outcomes-based education and quality assurance is still a very big problem today. And we're talking about 2 decades at least. Quality assurance on if you achieve the skills and competencies of the programs and courses delivered is still a big question mark. And it's still a major research topic. So when I presented this, I was talking about education and the 4th Industrial Revolution and lifelong learning. But now we're not just talking about the 4th Industrial Revolution. In fact, Microsoft Asia Pacific head during the time I presented this was talking about what 4th Industrial Revolution. We're already in the 5th Industrial Revolution, and that was 6 or 7 years ago. And we're still talking about the 4th Industrial Revolution. One of my key arguments is we need to have the ability to continuously learn, adapt, and apply rapidly changing technologies to rapidly changing learning and work environments so that we adapt to cultural, economic, political, and social developments. Simple, but encompassing. When we talk about micro-credentials and how it is supposed to be integrated into higher education and how it contributes to society, we have to be encompassing. We have to be holistic, because the world does not work in silos. The world is interconnected. Industry is connected with society. It's connected with the labor force. It's connected to skills development. It's connected to education, higher education, and the education sector is connected to each other. So we cannot actually afford to look at micro-credentials and its potential separately on per industry or per sector. It has to be done collectively, holistically, and comprehensively. So we need to look at skills, competencies, and values in relation to outcome-based curriculum, designing micro-credentials based on skills and competencies, and to a certain extent, values. We shouldn't only talk about 21st century skills and competencies for lifelong learning. We have to integrate, and I think it was mentioned a few times yesterday, that each and every learner should inculcate and enhance the capacity to continuously learn. Because no matter where you are, as a learner, you will continuously learn. Either you're in the work environment, even you're an entrepreneur, you're in academia, you're a researcher in international development, we have to continuously learn. And if you do not have the capacity or culture of lifelong learning and continuously learning, you will not be able to catch up and come out with key innovations that contributes to enhancing the sectors you're in or a society in general. So continuous improvement in teaching and learning environments and practices is something that needs to be addressed in relation to micro-credentials. So holistically, we talk about the capacity of the teachers, the content developers, the researchers that talks about how to effectively address pedagogical issues and andragogical issues, looking at the different capacities. We talk about, yesterday we were talking about, how do you call this thing? Using digital technologies for conferences. And in fact, last year, or was it early this year, I had to do a talk which was put in a metaverse. So it was a metaverse conference. I've never done that before, but it happened. We're talking about different technologies that makes things happen. However, we have to put it on the foundation that any innovation is based on something that happened before. Higher education developments and the development at the regional level is based on traditional higher education practices, which transcends towards changes because of technological advancement, new research, new knowledge, and new applications of knowledge. So when we're talking about the regional aspect, and as I was talking to our friend yesterday on the relationship on the regional frameworks that has been undertaken in the region. So that's why we're asking MQA and AQRFC to work together with us in parallel to develop the frameworks. How do we address micro-credentials? We do need, and I agree with all of you, we do need a common definition at least, but a definition and framework that does not mandate ASEAN member states to follow a prescribed way of doing things. Framing it and let the member states work and develop how they address micro-credentials in their own way, in their own pace, but based on certain principles. So it enhances recognition. And of course, the important thing, there's quality assurance, recognition not only from industry, but also from academia in the region and hopefully in the other parts of the world. Now, I don't know how much time I have. Okay, so I just want to highlight this. When Wes sent this to me, I looked at it and I said, I think it's a good definition. It's not too prescriptive, but it has key focus points. Focus learning achievement on that verifies what the learner knows, including an assessment. It has a standalone value. Take note on the word stackable and unbundling and relevant quality assurance. There are a lot of training programs, micro-credentials, MOOCs in the internet. Not all of them are of quality. Some of them assessments are not done effectively. And to frame the region and national micro-credentials, these key elements, I believe, I mean, some people might not agree, needs to be there. So it's a strong basis for a regional, we can push for this to be a regional definition because the key elements are there. Of course, the ministers and the senior officers can, for education, can actually put in their ideas. But the key elements on assessment, skills and competencies, recognition and quality assurance needs to be there. Otherwise, we can just develop anything and just charge, and then there's no quality. This is something I like to show, and I've been a fan of Lego. So take note, there's a disclaimer. So it's the same thing. Somebody presented, I think, was it Malaysia or was it Paulina? Presented something. So learning blocks, let's look at it as micro-credentials. Each one has skills and competencies as the basis. There will be assessment to ensure that the quality. So it's like the blocks are there, different colors, different shapes. You accumulate, you assemble, and you eventually come out with what you want to build. Take note, there are general and specific. If you look at a degree, you talk about the core professional competencies required, but they're also general. So you talk about core subjects and the electives. However, as I mentioned yesterday, building blocks and stacking it towards a degree, the key challenge is, does it actually build towards graduate competencies, graduate profile? So that's the key challenge. Just connecting the dots and building it and stacking it does not necessarily mean it will be the same. So the challenge is how to make sure that when we stack all the skills and competencies towards a degree, that the learner actually achieve the graduate competencies of traditional higher education programs. There's a lot of things. Innovation is always like that. But if we don't start, how do we know the key challenges and how do we move forward in addressing the key challenges? It's basically the learning block, degree learning requirements, accumulation of learning blocks, assembly, assessment, and recognition. Key thing there is, at the end of the day, micro-credentials should be recognized, not just by industry, but also by education institutions, governments. Take note, the largest employer in the world are mostly governments. If the government does not even recognize and accept micro-credentials as part of requirements for getting entry for government service, then we are in big trouble. Okay, I think I still have a few more slides, so I have time. Okay. Why micro-credentials? Because of multiple learning pathways. It empowers the learners through digital technologies. There is a need for appropriate pedagogy or andragogy. Why do I put andragogy and pedagogy? Because the learners can be young, can be old, can be elderly, can be a retired person, for their personal consumption and learning, or for something in relation to their career progression, or even entrepreneurs trying to venture into a new sector or business, and they need to look at, okay, what are the key things needed to venture? So there's a lot of things. The use of multiple delivery channels. The key important thing, by the way, I almost forgot, is multiple stakeholder collaboration. To make things work, when we look at comprehensive approach towards the use of micro-credentials, is multi-stakeholder approach. We have to bring in not just industry, not just the researchers, not just the providers, not just the higher education institutions, not just governments, but everyone as much as possible. We have last year, when we worked on higher education, we've talked about inclusive, complementary, equal partnerships. And the way forward towards micro-credential is to put in our interests individually as a stakeholder group, put it on the table, so we negotiate that everyone will be happy with how the solutions we put in relation to micro-credentials at national, regional, or even global levels. Everyone, every stakeholder group should be happy, because otherwise the system might not sustain itself. The right to education and lifelong learning, it's very important. We've talked about validation, assessment, recognition. And one of the things I really wanted to pinpoint is the importance of recognition of prior learning, so that we don't waste the learner's time. Because if they already know and have the skills and competencies, they should be accorded the right recognition that they have it already. And of course, quality. I think that's about it. I'll go forward. But micro-credentials addresses changing world of work and society, addresses digital transformation, and actually is part of the digital transformation initiative. Can contribute, but can also, it can address, but it can also contribute to challenges in relation to equity, diversity, and inclusion. It depends on how we use it, and addressing key challenges, especially digital divide, the access to infrastructure, digital literacy issues, of course, changing demographics. And this one, I made a point, And I actually want to reiterate that lifelong learning is not just a need, but it is a right of every individual. I said this during the lifelong learning conference in Bali, and I want to say it again. It is a need. It's not a need. It's not just a need, but it's a right for each and every individual. What you learn in formal, informal, and non-formal setting is skills and competencies and values. And you do need to have it recognized. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Roger. I actually didn't know you like Lego. I didn't know that before. But thank you. That was very comprehensive. We got to see, the ASEAN work plans. We got to see that framework. You brought up many important points that it's not just about learning to do, but it's learning how to live together. I think it's a very important point about the values. Why do we do this? Yesterday Wes pointed out the big credential, which is all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals there. And I think we keep talking about this, but we should also keep that in mind. And why are we doing this? Another important point as we move forward together, it's not that we're prescribing a set way that every country has to follow. I think we can keep the context in mind, but work together and move forward together. So with that, I'd like to open the floor for questions. As we do have some participants from online, if you'd like to raise a question, also kindly state your name and organization.
Hello. Thank you, Roger, for your presentation. Yesterday, we touched upon we had a conversation about how we can mobilize faculty members or teachers. And you mentioned in your presentation about bring out all the different stakeholders work together. And we heard a lot about that principle. But do we really have any good model for involving all the stakeholders, important stakeholders in the process? If you have any cases, please share with us. Thank you.
Well, let me put it in a way. The best way of doing it is at institutional level and at the local community level. The individual higher education institution can work with local community, the key industries, and different local communities. Smaller level. It's difficult to do it immediately at the global level or even regional. So this is the way to do it. What industry and higher education institutions and even governments are doing now is collaborating on, supporting research, capacity building to support industries. It's happening, but you don't see it everywhere, and it varies in terms of how deep the collaboration is. Now, one thing I think we have been proud of, UNESCO, RIHED, and ASEAN has been proud of last year, has been how we collaborated together in pushing the higher education agenda in the region, and we're still pushing. How we've collaborated with ASEP, how we've collaborated with the different ministries. And what we're trying to do now is also to bring in the student voice, enhance, strengthen, and establish their institution. And hopefully we manage to do a multi-stakeholder approach towards addressing and directing the development of higher education in the region. So this is what we're trying to do. It's not easy. In fact, we all know the pains and challenges, but as long as we keep on pushing, it will happen. But the easiest way is to do it at local level, institutional level. If each and more higher education institutions think about partnerships in relation to industry, in relation to the local community, in relation to government, local or national, then it's a start. It has to be on the ground up. One of the things, one thing I forgot to mention, that if we talk about the region and regional initiative and harmonization, in spite of the fact that it's focused on the region, it is founded and anchored on national initiatives and national systems. because the region is nothing without the national systems. The higher education space in the region cannot be sustained and cannot be supported without stronger higher education systems in member states. So that's why we can put frameworks, we can look at higher education, micro credentials. That's why we let the member states develop based on their pace, their capacities, of course, helping each other out. But there has to be certain guidelines that directs the direction of where member states should be going. It should not be too prescriptive, but it should not be too lax that, we only have a definition and that's it. Otherwise, everybody goes, some goes north, some goes south, some goes, how do we have to have at least one direction and have some guidance without being too prescriptive. So that's the only way to collaborate and sustain initiatives at regional and even at global levels. Yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, Dr. Roger, for again comprehensive presentations. By the way, I'm Pariono from SEAMEO RIHED, in case from the online participant do not know me. You mentioned regarding micro-credentials and a lot of factors affecting this. And I personally also, in agreement that one of the strong push, the reasons why it become popular is about digitalization and also the fast-changing occupations in the workplace. And because of this, I think training providers, education providers need to be more agile and responsive to this. And you mentioned that now, even though a lot of people are talking about IR maybe 5.0, but SEAMEO RIHED also in collaboration with UNESCO as a partner in this, we came up with an education framework. We call it a SERI, Smart Education Readiness Index. That's basically measuring in terms of what level actually the Tibet institutions or can be also applied in higher education on the 5.0. I think you'll be surprised in terms of the result. Even from our colleague from Singapore, when we send this, in terms of the infrastructure, maybe they we put level from 0 to 5. Many of them still level 3 for the infrastructure. But in general, in the region, still 1, 2. So even though we dream big, some maybe certain example can reach at that level. But in reality, actually, we are still, I think in general, still 2.0. So I think it's still very important for every one of us who are working in education to continue kind of looking forward, progressing, so that at the end, the adoptions of this digitalization of technology can be more and more, because from this, I think we'll address it. And this, I think, will also affect in terms of the implementations of micro-credentials in the education. It's just a comments on that. Stefan, thank you very much.
Oh, I totally agree with you. That's why when I mentioned that it's an enabler, but it also enhances challenges. Challenges has been there even without the advent of new digital technologies. And we're still talking about places in some countries with no electricity and no clean water. I mean, that's why I'm very happy about the VOCTEC's development on these mobile laboratories and simulation laboratories, and which brings laboratories to far rural areas and schools which has no capacity to have laboratories. So innovations like these are things that should be done and should be addressed and supported, because no matter what, we are part of the privileged few who have the education and who were able to be educated and interface with the rest of the world. A lot of our friends and colleagues don't have our luck or opportunity. But at the end of the day, we are all humans, and each and everyone needs the opportunity to enhance bring out their full potential. And unfortunately, not everyone has that yet. And as part of humanity, we should try to utilize whatever innovations that come in to address the inclusion and equity aspects. So each and every person can actually contribute in their own way to society. And this is the core. We have to live, we have to earn money, but at the end of the day, each and every one of us is part of the world, part of humanity, and we do have to contribute. But if everyone is still having challenges in terms of where to go to eat, to where to find money to eat, then how can they contribute to humanity? It's more challenging that way. So we have to focus on inclusion, equity, and quality education to enhance capacity of each and every person to make a difference in their life, in their society, and in the world. So yeah, thank you for the comment, and I do agree with you. There are challenges, but together we can make things happen. Yeah, thank you.
And perhaps we can check if we have any questions from online. I think we might have a few.
We have two questions online. One by the name of a gentleman named Professor Morshidi. I think everyone's waving at you, sir. Former Director General of Higher Education in Malaysia. Professor Morshidi says, good morning to all. Probably knows most of you. Why is it the private sectors of HEIs, the higher education institutions, are quick to roll out courses related to micro-credentials? So courses related to micro-credentials, but not public higher education institutions, at least in the case of Malaysia. What about other countries in ASEAN? And a second question, just to kind of give you some food for thought, another gentleman, Yonesawa Sensei. I think we all know our good friend and colleague, Professor Yonesawa. Good to see you, sir. May I ask your views on possible cooperation in the ASEAN +3 and +6 regional framework on micro-credentials? Brilliant opportunity to respond. Over to you.
Thank you both, and nice to know that you're with us virtually. So yeah. Oh, very difficult questions. Honestly speaking, in terms of public or private developments, in terms of micro-credentials, public sector normally looks at ROI. Okay, if they develop something, they have to make sure that they can recover the cost because they are not subsidized in most cases. And if they're subsidized by government, it's to a certain extent. So they look at how many users, how does it contribute, how does it reduce costs of higher education program delivery, or how many new learners do they get. We talked about yesterday, they talk about that it doesn't have to be students, it can be learners who can pay or who can just use it for free, depends. And then there's normally a catch. It's a marketing scheme as well, but sometimes, if you want it credited with credits and recognized, and you pay a certain fee. So that's one aspect. So it's a cost-benefit analysis and a return of investment criteria from most private sector institutions. Public sector is another story. It's driven by government initiatives and funding, of course. I cannot say that we have the evidence yet, and that is one of the reasons why we do need to know what's going on across the region, including Timor-Leste. Because we have to know where we stand and point A, and where we have to go, point B. And that's the reason why we need the frameworks and guidelines to guide at least that we all walk towards the same direction or the same endpoint, and something that we all need to agree on. In relation to +3 and +6, personally, I think we do need to think and collaborate in how micro-credentials should be looked at in relation to the minimum is ASEAN +3. China, Korea, and Japan have their MOOCs. At MOOCs, it can also be translated and seen in relation to micro-credentials. We have to look at the demographic issues in the +3 countries with aging population and the need for changing supply and demand dynamics for work, knowledge production and application, and commercialization of knowledge. So there is a need to really push for collaboration in relation to micro-credentials, enhancing and collaborating in terms of knowledge production and disseminating knowledge from our partners. Not ASEAN and ASEAN higher education institutions do have something to contribute to the +3 countries. The +3 countries can contribute, and the best thing that happens is to collaborate and developing something new, sharing resources, sharing knowledge, and disseminating to the ASEAN plus 3 or even the ASEAN plus 6 countries um, to work together. We can actually look at, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know if it will work. But we can actually think of, working together on enhancing capacity and developing micro-credentials. Content and delivery mechanisms, we can leave that to institutions and researchers on how to make it more effective. But we talk about how costly it is. We talk about that we don't have the expertise to develop it. So we can have a center to develop it, build the capacity, and teach people in the institutions how to build and make micro-credentials effectively. That's one thing. Second thing there is we can share micro-credentials. Of course, important thing there is a focus on QA and recognition, and hopefully credit bearing. Easier said than done. Honestly, it's not easy. But if we set our goals towards building it, then we can start the conversation and hopefully push for something that matters. If we cannot do it at at national level for all institutions, then we do it in a consortium and build it. Then if we actually showcase that it's working properly, like the AIMS program, the consortium, credit transfers, quality assurance, and recognition are there, we may be able to do it initially at the consortium level. Then once we can showcase that it's working, push for the countries, the ASEAN plus 3 or ASEAN plus 3s to agree. Not easy, again, not easy, but if we set the goal, we can put certain points where we agree to achieve, then I think we can make things happen. Thank you. I hope I answered the questions.
Okay, I think we still have 1 or 2 minutes if there's any additional question from the floor.
Thank you. Limonas, Batchcraft. The presentation here, especially when you talk about lifelong learning, I think for me was kind of ringing the bell that lifelong learning usually requires a lot of cooperation with other actors. Yeah, I think universities cannot do it alone. It requires cooperation on co-designing micro-credentials, co-designing courses. And I think when you showed the different domains of learning, I think definitely this needs cooperation with industry, with community partners, because I think that universities have its own strengths, I think, in providing evidence-based and research-based learning, and it has strengths in its own reputation and accreditation. But then I think if there would be chances for cooperation with technical partners to help with implementation of micro-credentials or portability, if there would be possibility to cooperate with businesses to co-design the content, I think that would be an interesting ventures forward. My question was, is there actually some space or opportunities for universities to have some kind of pilot innovative initiatives or projects where they can experiment, test these ideas? So, for example, joint micro-credentials, where universities could collaborate.
Thank you for bringing that up. Actually, I was just with Paulina West and our friend from Lao PDR on the 11th, right? And we're talking about, why don't we pilot the development of, 2, 3 programs utilizing micro-credentials and see the challenges and potentials. So we actually just talk about it. We haven't done anything yet. We were just talking. Why don't we pilot? We learn from developing it. If we're talking about using micro-credentials and changing how we deliver and how learning actually how it contributes to higher education and particularly reducing the cost of higher education, which has been going up for the past decades, actually. So we're talking about it, but we we need the money. As usual, we need money to start, but piloting it, we were talking with Lao PDR, so you're talking about doing it, but we can talk about piloting and putting up a group, piloting how programs can be designed, mix micro-credential, or even having a full micro-credential, just to pilot innovation and our thinking and see how it works, what are the challenges, and if we can still push it forward. But that way we need to come out with a group who and which institution wants to pilot it. Of course, mobilized resources. So we definitely would need RIHED and UNESCO to help with the expertise. Yeah, so I hope I've answered the question, and I think you had a question.
Thank you, Roger, for your clarifications. And so, okay, I'm Anderson from Experience. In fact, just now when you mentioned about education institutions or higher education institutions as probably the best actor, right, to implement micro-credentials, I do have a question here, right? So while we recognize, or at least I recognize, that qualification is the key business model of education institutions, I think credentialing might have to be something higher than qualifications in terms of its purpose. All right? A qualification belongs to the mandate of an education institution because that is what an education institution will sell. Okay? But credentialing as a common good should be a level beyond qualification. All right? So my question is, therefore, would education institution therefore be the best actor? Right? Could it be something else, a government or public entity doing that credentialing? Now, why I say that is because credentialing always have to go with recognition, right? And recognition will cut into the financial consideration. I have this feeling that recognition of credentials or micro-credentials or macro-credentials is a very touchy topic for institutions because yesterday I mentioned if I were to recognize 10 credits or 10 credentials out of a 15 credit program, I would lose 10 credits of opportunity of making money. All right. So if that were to be done by institutions, I think there could be challenges. All right. So would a separate entity, okay, this is a hypothetical or intellectual question, would a separate entity therefore be in a better position if we were to recognize credentialing, not just education, but credentialing as a common good?
Thank you. Well, thank you for bringing that up. One of the things I forgot to mention is that one of the things that has been happening, I think more than 2 decades, has been the growth of professional credentials, certified management, CMA, CFAs, CAs, are industry credentials, the qualifications actually. So it's like certified financial analyst, certified management accountant, which has been recognized by industry worldwide. And there is a certain process, in fact, a series of exams and, a validation in terms of experience, number of years of experience level for you to acquire that. So you, in that aspect, that's important. How to have a separate agency for credentialing or something that's possible, but it's something that needs to be piloted first. I'm not saying that accreditation and credentialing should only be focused on higher education institutions. The Malaysia case showed that they actually pass it on to third-party QA. So I think it can be done. But it's a long discussion, and there are vested interests along the way, not just for higher education institutions, but also private sector as well. So yes, but thank you for putting that on the table. That's interesting, and that should be part of the discussion as well. Thank you.
I think we're running a little bit over time. Do we still have any questions?
Yes, if we could read one more, and then we'll shift to our next session. Another friend and colleague, Professor Shingo Aishizawa, a great mentor for UNESCO as well, and the former president of the Tokyo Convention Committee, who really gave us a mandate in this space to talk about recognition of micro-credentials. So we're grateful to have you online. He said, I would like to ask, and I lost the question. There. I would like to ask about stackable models of micro-credentials. Do you believe, is it easier to exercise a stackable model of micro-credentials for those countries where NQF have been well established? Some countries with virtually no effective NQF, like Japan, and I assume it may be difficult to exercise this stackable model. And now at the Kansai University of International Studies, a VP.
Oh, everyone's asking difficult questions. But thank you, Professor Shingo. Personally, this is not based on academic research yet. My personal view is, stackable models are based on graduate attributes. Graduate attributes and profiles are based on certain learning outcomes, skills, and competencies. So even if you don't have a national qualifications framework, you base it on learning outcomes, skills, and competencies. So it's the same thing. Because the national qualifications framework, to a certain extent, is basically a mapping of the qualifications, which highlights learning outcomes and skills and competencies required to achieve that, and putting it in place. So I don't really see the difference if you have an NQF or not in relation to stackability of micro-credentials. The key question is actually, can we actually make sure that when we stack the micro-credentials, including its skills and competencies, that it will actually transform into and contribute to the achievement of skills and competencies at the program level? That is the key question. I hope I answered the question. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Maybe I think this marks the end of the keynote session. So maybe we can give a round of applause to Roger.